Picture this, right? It's an induction ceremony for, I think it was 500 incoming Ph.D. students.
Oh, wow. That's a lot.
Yeah, a massive university great hall. And, they're sitting there probably terrified, probably super excited, just wondering what the next 4 to 6 years of their lives will actually look like.
Right. The classic academic anxiety.
Exactly. And a senior professor gets up and is asked what singular piece of advice he'd give to all these new candidates. And his response, he literally says, remember that after your mother, your supervisor will be the most important person in your life.
I mean, it sounds incredibly theatrical when you put it like that, but honestly, that mother analogy is surprisingly accurate.
Really? You think it's that intense?
Oh, absolutely. When we look at the pedagogical data and the university guidelines we're diving into for today's deep dive, this whole journey is universally described as intensive, isolating, and highly emotional.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's not just some transactional exchange where you pay tuition, get your information, and get a degree. It's a deeply formative developmental relationship. And what we see in today's stack of sources, which has a lot of empirical studies and institutional frameworks for you to explore, is a massive central conflict right at the heart of this dynamic.
Right, because when this relationship fails, it fails spectacularly.
Exactly. When a student drops out or just fails to complete their research, the supervisor will almost always blame a lack of student motivation. Or, a lack of inherent skill.
Like they just didn't have what it takes.
Right, the student just wasn't cut out for it. But if you ask the students who actually leave, they cite poor supervision, shifting goalposts, and a total lack of feedback as the main reasons for the breakdown. So there is this fundamental disconnect, just a massive blind spot on both sides.
Oh.
And our mission for this deep dive is to decode the unspoken rules of this intense relationship and figure out how both parties can actually survive and thrive.
Okay, let's unpack this, because it is wild to me. We're talking about some of the most incredibly smart, highly educated people on the planet.
Oh, without a doubt.
Right. These are world-class academics, brilliant researchers dedicating their lives to uncovering the secrets of the universe. Why do they struggle so profoundly with basic interpersonal communication?
Well, it isn't a lack of intellect, and that's the trap. It is
Yeah.
a reliance on an entirely invisible system. The root cause of the breakdown is that academia, historically, just operates on these vague, unspoken rules.
It's assuming people get it.
Exactly. Everyone assumes the other person just knows how things are supposed to work because they're operating in an environment that's completely steeped in tradition.
And we see that perfectly in the institutional codes of practice. One of our sources points out that university policy documents actually use intentionally vague language. They will say things like, supervisory meetings should happen normally or as appropriate.
Yes, normally.
That word normally is a total trap. I mean, it's like asking a new roommate to clean the kitchen regularly.
Oh, that never ends well.
Never. To one person, regularly means wiping down the counters every single night with bleach. To another person, it means doing the dishes when there are literally no clean plates left in the cupboard.
What's fascinating here is how that gap in interpretation immediately breeds massive anxiety. Think about the two perspectives, because they are actually entirely valid in their own context.
Okay, lay it out for me.
To a stressed out first-year doctoral student who, has hit a wall in their research and feels like a complete imposter, meeting normally with their supervisor probably means sitting down twice a week for an hour just to get some reassurance.
Right, they want a guide. They need that lifeline.
But then look at the supervisor. They're totally overworked. They're juggling heavy teaching loads, administrative duties, family life, and they're trying to secure their own active research grants.
So they don't have time for twice a week.
Not at all. To them, meeting normally means checking in once a month, or maybe once a quarter if things are going smoothly. Neither of them is inherently wrong, but they are operating in two completely different realities.
And that institutional laziness, just relying on a word like normally, because it's too hard to standardize rules across, say, the physics department and the literature department, it trickles down directly to the student as chronic stress.
Yes, exactly.
Which is exactly why the guidelines from Imperial College London stood out so prominently in the sources. They recognize this systemic failure. They are absolutely adamant that boundaries must be negotiated explicitly and immediately. You cannot leave normally up to chance.
Because if you don't define the boundary, you inevitably cross it. Imperial College London offers some very concrete negotiation points. And the first one isn't just about how often you meet, but where you meet.
Wait, really? The location matters.
Yeah. They actually advise against always meeting in the supervisor's office.
Oh, that makes sense. Because of power dynamic.
Yes, the psychology behind that is brilliant. When a student walks into a senior academic's office, surrounded by all their awards and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, it immediately sets a rigid, hierarchical tone.
You're definitely on their turf.
You are.
Yeah.
The student instantly feels like an apprentice waiting to be judged. So Imperial suggests neutral spaces to lower those stakes.
Like grabbing a coffee, or maybe walking across campus, instead of sitting across a massive mahogany desk. It just humanizes the interaction.
It really encourages open dialogue. And the second point Imperial stresses is documentation. Who actually documents the meetings?
Which, honestly, feels so formal for a casual coffee chat.
Right.
But spoiler alert to everyone listening,
Yeah.
the guidelines say the student should be doing this.
They absolutely should. After that coffee chat, the student writes up the notes and the action items and emails them to the supervisor. It verifies mutual understanding.
It forces the student to say, hey, here is what I think we just agreed on.
Exactly. And if the supervisor disagrees, they catch it in 20 minutes, not 6 months later when a crucial chapter is due.
That is so smart. The guidelines also demand clarity on communication channels. Like, are we using email, Microsoft Teams, phone calls? And crucially, what is a reasonable response time before the student is allowed to follow up?
Such a necessary boundary.
Plus, they emphasize setting clear boundaries around work hours and holidays. Supervisors actually need to actively tell their scholars to book annual leaves to prevent total burnout, because students will literally work themselves into the ground out of guilt.
They will. And if we look at the UCL Good Supervision Guide, they add another layer to this foundational boundary setting. They introduce a concept called thinking outside the thesis box.
I like that phrase.
It's great. The premise is that a supervisor's job isn't just to be a taskmaster, whipping the thesis over the finish line. They actually have to support the student's broader career aspirations.
Whether those aspirations are academic or completely outside of academia in the corporate world, they have to see the whole person, which obviously requires honest conversations early on.
Very early on.
But if normally is a trap and unspoken rules are this huge minefield, how do we actually measure the gap between two people's realities? I mean, there has to be a diagnostic tool for this. Can't imagine you just sit down and say, all right, tell me all your unspoken assumptions.
Well, you can't, because people don't know what they're assuming until it's actively challenged. The best tool in our sources for diagnosing this is the expectations of research supervision scale. It's widely known in the literature as the Moses scale.
Okay.
And it is just brilliant in its simplicity.
How does it actually work?
So it's a 2-page questionnaire that both the student and the supervisor fill out completely independently before they formally begin working together. You rate various academic responsibilities on a scale from 1 to 5.
Okay.
A1 means this is entirely the supervisor's responsibility. A 5 means this is entirely the student's responsibility. And a 3 means it's an equal shared responsibility.
I have to push back on this a little bit. I mean, we are talking about doctoral level research here. Is it really that common for people to completely disagree on something as fundamental as who selects the methodology or who is responsible for editing the grammar? It seems like that should be incredibly obvious. The student does the work, the supervisor reviews it.
You would think so, and logic would definitely dictate that. But the empirical proof tells a completely different story. There is a fascinating study by Helfer and Drew highlighted in our stack looking at an Australian engineering program. They surveyed a full cohort of Ph.D. students and compared their answers to what the supervisors and the university codes expected using this exact scale.
And what did they find?
Well, for some things, like selecting the broad research topic, everyone generally agreed it was a shared duty. It scored a solid 3 on the Moses scale across the board.
Okay, that makes sense.
But when it came to who actually writes, edits, and presents the thesis, the ambiguity was absolutely massive.
Define math.
It was a literal 3-way split among the student body. 33% of the students thought writing and presenting the thesis was solely the student's job.
Okay, that's 1/3.
Yep. 37% of the students thought it was entirely the supervisor's responsibility, and the remaining 30% thought it was a shared co-writing task.
Wait. 37% of PhD students thought their supervisor was supposed to write and edit their thesis for them.
Yes.
How does someone get into a PhD program and think the professor's going to do their homework?
It sounds totally absurd until you understand the mechanism of how modern scientific research is published. This confusion happens heavily in paper format theses. In a lot of STEM fields, you don't just write one big book at the end.
Right.
Your thesis is actually a compilation of 3 or 4 journal articles that are submitted for publication along the way.
And journal articles always have multiple authors.
Precisely. The students feel that if the supervisor is going to be listed as a co-author on the published paper, which is standard practice, the supervisor should be actively co-writing and line editing the manuscript with them. They view it as a joint venture.
Interesting.
But the supervisors expect the student to do the writing completely independently to prove their competence. They view their own co-authorship simply as a reflection of securing the funding and designing the lab experiment.
So they are operating on two entirely different definitions of what co-authorship actually means.
Exactly. And if you fail to clarify this exact role early on, the dissatisfaction is severe. You have students sitting around waiting weeks for the supervisor to rewrite a methodology chapter, feeling ignored and totally abandoned.
And the supervisor.
Meanwhile, the supervisor is waiting for the student to fix their own grammar, feeling frustrated that the student lacks initiative.
That sounds like an absolute nightmare. A nightmare born entirely out of an assumption. I want to pause here and just relate this to anyone listening right now. Imagine handing a 1 to 5 responsibility scale to your boss today.
Oh, wow.
Right. Think about how much of your current job description or your performance review is entirely built on unspoken assumptions about who is supposed to initiate a project or who handles client pushback.
It's a terrifying thought experiment for most professionals, but a totally necessary one.
So once you use something like the Moses scale, and you find out that you and your supervisor are living on different planets regarding expectations, what do you actually do with that terrifying information? You lock those expectations down in writing. And here's where it gets really interesting. The sources heavily recommend utilizing a Memorandum of Understanding, an MOU, or a student-supervisor agreement. It's basically a prenuptial agreement for your academic marriage.
I like that analogy, but I would challenge it with a crucial difference.
Okay, what's the difference?
Well, a prenuptial agreement sits in a drawer, gathering dust until you're ready to get a divorce. And MAU sits on your desk, and you actively use it to keep yourselves happily married. The crucial context here is that an MOU is non-binding. It isn't some legal contract that you use to sue your department. It is a highly customizable living document.
Living meaning it changes over time.
Exactly. The sources emphasize that you need to revisit and revise your MOU every 6 to 12 months.
Why so often?
Because a first-year student needs a very different level of support, maybe a lot of hand-holding and methodological guidance, than a third-year student. By year 3, you really just need the supervisor to get out of your way and provide quick peer reviews. The relationship must evolve, and the document evolves with it.
The templates for these MOUs get incredibly granular too, which I really appreciate. They don't leave room for normally. The Stellenbosch University template, which is developed by Malapo, Fury, Lasons, and Buchholz, literally forces the student and supervisor to negotiate the different stages of research and explicitly decide on authorship for future publications before the research even begins.
Wow, getting ahead of the problem.
Exactly. No more guessing who gets to be first author on the paper.
And if you look at the Aalborg University guidelines in Denmark, they take that granularity even further. Their MOU template asks about expected email turnaround times. It even asks you to explicitly agree on how involved the scholar should be in the departmental social life.
Okay, I have to ask about that. Why does an academic contract need to dictate social life?
Because academia famously blurs the line between your work and your identity.
Sure.
So if the department has a Friday afternoon lab mixer or a weekly research colloquium, is attendance mandatory for your standing in the department? Or can you just do your lab work, pack up your bag, and go home to your family?
That is amazing. It just completely removes all the social anxiety of wondering if you are offending your boss by not drinking a beer with them on a Friday.
Exactly.
And then there's the Johannesburg Business School model, the
Sure.
JBS agreement. It draws this really sharp contrast between what the student owes the institution and what the supervisor owes the student.
It's very balanced.
Right. The student's duties are things like completing the literature review, getting ethics clearance, preparing the manuscript. But the supervisor has very specific, measurable deliverables too, ensuring the student has physical lab access, keeping written progress records, and providing time as feedback.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the absolute genius of the JBS agreement is that it includes a built-in dispute resolution framework.
Why is that genius, though?
Because it acknowledges and balances a very tricky power dynamic. A student is inherently in a vulnerable position. Their future career rests in the hands of this one senior academic. The JBS MOU outlines that if a disagreement happens, say over the direction of the research or a missed deadline, and an amicable resolution fails, there is a clear pre-agreed process to bring in a neutral facilitator, like the head of department.
Ah, so it creates a psychological safety net.
Exactly.
It means that bringing in a third party isn't a personal betrayal or an act of war. It's just step 4 on a piece of paper we both signed 2 years ago.
Precisely. Conflicts don't just fester in the dark until someone drops out of the program.
Okay, so having a living document for your academic marriage is fantastic in theory. But day-to-day execution requires actual action. You can't just sign an MOU and expect the relationship to manage itself.
No, definitely not.
Which brings us to a massive proactive theme in the sources: managing up. What can the student actively do to drive this dynamic? Because if I'm a student, my first instinct is just to keep my head down, never cause problems, and wait for the master to bestow knowledge.
And modern pedagogy completely rejects that idea. The student is not a passive recipient of instruction. Let's go back to that Griffith University study by Helfer and Drew. They found that student satisfaction wasn't just about having a nice or supportive supervisor. Satisfaction was heavily tied to things entirely within the student's control.
Like what?
Specifically, things like psychological maturity, preparedness, and active gratitude.
So what does this all mean in practice? Let's figure out the concrete rules of managing up. If I'm guessing, based on what we've covered, I imagine a lot of it has to do with respecting the supervisor's time.
You hit the nail on the head. The literature gives us 5 golden rules for how a scholar can actively manage up. Rule number 1 sounds insultingly obvious, but it is the most violated. Respect deadlines.
Because if I miss my deadline, it's not just my problem, it ruins their schedule.
Exactly. Supervisors are playing calendar Tetris. If you promise a draft on Tuesday, they have blocked out Wednesday morning to read it. If you deliver it on Thursday, that time slot is gone. They can't just magically create 3 hours out of thin air to give you quality feedback.
Which flows perfectly into rule number 2, my absolute favorite. Never demand urgent turnarounds. Please do not email a 50-page, highly technical draft on the Sunday night and expect a full, thoughtful critique by Monday morning.
Right.
The sources explicitly state you need to give them at least 2 weeks for a major review.
And rule number 3 is where we get into the real psychology of academic development. Be prepared to defend your ideas with evidence.
Okay, unpack that for me. Because if my boss tells me to change a chapter, my instinct is to just say, yes, absolutely, I'll change it.
Which is the exact wrong approach if you want to earn their respect. Academics are professionally trained to poke holes in arguments. It's what they do. If your supervisor suggests a direction you don't agree with and you just fold immediately, they actually lose respect for you. You have to push back.
But politely, I assume.
Politely and with data. Don't just stubbornly say no. Defend your stance using the literature or the results of your own lab data. That demonstrates academic growth. It shifts the dynamic from parent-child to peer-to-peer, which is exactly what they want to see.
So you move from being a passive student to an active researcher who owns their project, which I imagine makes Rule 4 pretty easy. Take charge of the meeting agendas.
Exactly. Don't walk into a meeting and wait for your supervisor to ask you what you've been doing. Bring a structured agenda, report on your progress, identify your roadblocks, and organize the necessary paperwork. You are the project manager of your own degree.
I love that.
And finally, rule number 5, acknowledge the human factor.
The human factor. Because behind all the intimidating titles, the tweed jackets, and the list of publications, everyone is just a stressed-out person trying to get through the week.
Precisely. There is a classic study in our stack by Hopwood et al. On the hidden realities of life as a doctoral student. And what they proved through extensive interviews is that there is absolutely no such thing as a normal student or a normal week.
Wait, so nobody is actually keeping it all together?
No one. Every single person's life, working patterns, and emotional challenges fluctuate wildly. You might have a great month of writing, followed by a month where you can't even look at your laptop because of a family issue.
Like life happens.
Both the scholar and the supervisor must maintain flexibility. If you want your supervisor to be understanding when you have a personal crisis or you hit a wall in your research, you have to extend that exact same grace to them when they take 3 weeks to answer an email because they are overwhelmed.
It is a two-way street of empathy. And when you put all of this together, the explicit communication to avoid vague language, mapping out expectations on the Moses scale, writing it down in a living OU, and actively managing up through mutual respect, it all points toward one ultimate goal.
Yes, it does.
According to a comprehensive pedagogical review published in the MDPI Encyclopedia, the entire point of managing these expectations isn't just to make the Ph.D. process less painful or more efficient.
No, it's a deliberate developmental continuum.
Exactly. The goal is to move the scholar from a place of structured dependence at the very beginning, where you need help holding the pipette or formatting a citation, to becoming a fully independent, autonomous, doctoral-level scholar, someone who isn't just following directions, but who can defend their ideas and who will one day supervise others.
This raises an important question for you, the listener. How active is your agency in your own professional relationships right now? Whether you are a doctoral candidate dealing with an academic advisor or just a professional dealing with a corporate manager, the underlying principles remain exactly the same.
The same rules apply everywhere.
Absolutely. So I highly encourage you to take the insights from this deep dive and practically apply them. Download an expectation scale and fill it out for your current job. Print out a basic memorandum of understanding template and see what a formal agreement of expectations looks like. And schedule a friendly, low-stakes coffee meeting in a neutral space with your supervisor or manager to align your paths. You don't have to be a passive participant. You have the power to co-create these dynamics.
It's all about bringing the unspoken into the spoken. But it does leave me with one final, slightly provocative thought to mull over.
Oh.
We've spent this time exploring how incredibly effective this intense, formal expectation setting is for academic supervisors and scholars. We know the Moses scales, the MEBUs, and the granular negotiations about email turnaround times and responsibilities prevent communication breakdowns. It saves research projects and it saves careers.
Undoubtedly.
But what would happen if we took these exact same rigid diagnostic tools and applied them to our personal relationships?
Oh.
Right. What if, tonight, you handed your romantic partner a Moses scale to rate who is responsible for emotional labor, from 1 to 5? What if you drafted a formal memorandum of understanding with your family members about holiday attendance, dispute resolution, and text message response times? Would utilizing that level of extreme, explicit boundary setting save those relationships from the exact same unspoken assumptions that ruin careers?
That is a very intense idea.
Or would treating them like an academic project completely strip them of their humanity? Because at the end of the day, as that professor said in the Great Hall, let me rephrase that. As that professor said in the Great Hall after your mother, your supervisor is the most important person in your life. And maybe, just maybe, all the important relationships in our life could benefit from a little less assumption and a little more clarity.